You're on the couch, tripping with Dr. Pete.
When you're stressed and you find yourself in that space where you're not being as kind as you understand yourself, that you should be, it's really important to check the practice. How are you doing? And reset your energy. And this is a practice, this notion of kindness. People often say, Pete, Dr. Pete, you're always so patient with folks who maybe troll or kind of like, and I'm human too. But I think it's important that we look at this thing like a practice, meaning you're not going to be perfect with it. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to drop the ball in your practice of compassion to yourself and to others. And so we'll talk a little bit about the practice of compassion, and how to keep it going, and really how to check yourself and use compassion as an antidote to your own pain, as an antidote to your own shame, using compassion as a healing energy towards others. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm excited I think this is going to be a good topic. I'm excited to hear your thoughts. So I'll pop a couple of these bubbles and then we'll go on with the talk.
Hey, Dr. Pete, just the podcast I needed this morning. I'm so happy to see you online. I'm working and listening and working. Shout out to the room. Great conversation already. Good morning.
Good to have you. Good to have you. Check yourself. You're one of my favorites. So we're talking a little bit about compassion. Basically, compassion, as I've heard it defined, it's a response to someone's suffering, right? When you see one suffer, it's not just the empathy, the ability to recognize the suffering, but there's also a desire to lessen it. Now, this is a really important piece. It's not just seeing that a person, or one, I should say, the reason why I say one is because you can also recognize the suffering within yourself. And so when you recognize the suffering within yourself, when you recognize the suffering with others, there's also a part of you that says, I want to lessen that suffering. So compassion has a call to action component to it, right? And so what happens when you have a compassionate kind of disposition, you'll find that there's a lot of other parts of you that become active. Like your patience will become active when your compassion is active. Compassion, they have a whole bunch of research on it because it's really, it's supposed to have a lot of positive effects on your physical health, reduction of stress. I mean, the more compassionate you are, the more stress you'll be. Remember, it'll increase your patience and kind of in some ways boost your overall well-being. The more compassionate you are to others, the more forgiving you are to others, the more understanding. You think it's something that you're giving out, but in actuality, it's something that you're being. And just by being it, you resonate at a higher frequency, and you can find it boosts your overall wellness. It reduces your depression, it reduces your sadness to have kind energy towards others. You feel better about yourself. You immediately, by being compassionate, meaning seeing someone's pain and feeling called to lessen it, you immediately start to feel better about the person that you are. You start to like yourself more. This compassion is not an easy thing. But if you can, and so that's why it's called a practice, because it's not just this act that you can do without, like it comes freely or naturally. Over time, you can become stronger in it. But a lot of times you have the instinct to withdraw. The thing I say all the time is it's easy to be compassionate with someone who is suffering and clearly suffering, right? But sometimes people are suffering indirectly, and compassionate is still the practice to employ. I'll give you an example. So sometimes you'll meet people along your way who are angry or cranky or depressed, down, just, not happy people, unhappy people. And those people are really kind of hard to deal with. They say mean things, hurtful things. And so you're left, and sometimes with an instinctive response, to respond in kind rather than in kindness. So you give them back. A lot of times people say, well, I like to mirror folks. If they give me negative energy, I give them back negative energy. And I understand that. I can understand how that pull happens. It happens without very much thinking. There's this part of the brain called the amygdala, which is like your emotional response center of the brain. And this amygdala becomes charged, right? And I'll tell you, it's the kind of the part that's the fight or flight response. And a lot of people, when this charge happens, they go right into the fight kind of response, which makes sense, to guard themselves, to protect themselves. At least that's intuitively what they feel like, instinctually what they feel like. But the reality is that energy is toxic, not only to the relationship or to the person, it can be damaging, but it's toxic to you. It's not a good experience to have the amygdala charged in that way. It creates an anxiety that even when you're not in that moment, it kind of carries on with you. These little small moments, they last for long periods of time. So your response to one, infraction, or one moment of someone else's problem, it kind of has a way of lingering in your system. Literally, not figuratively, like literally. So this compassion route and this compassion practice, it says, I can, instead of fighting or avoiding, because that's another problem, right? Sometimes we shrink or avoid. That's another way of coping. I'm going to love. And your compassion becomes kind of like a superpower. So in the face of other people's limitation, you kind of have a certain strength, and that is counterintuitive. Because remember, to love, to be compassionate, it feels like you're giving of yourself in a way that feels like it makes you vulnerable. But the reality is, and I say this all the time, your love and ability to be compassionate, it's abundant. And doesn't really have any requirements, because it's not about the other person. It's really about your disposition. How do you want to be in the world? This compassion that you put outward is also the compassion that then you're able to more access for yourself, which is huge. Because a lot of times we will make mistakes. A lot of times you're not in a good state. And sometimes you need to kind of reset and recenter on compassion, which is exactly what I was describing a little bit earlier for myself. I found myself being a little bit more irritable. Like, what's going on? And then, I feel and understand for myself, rather than beating myself up or feeling a tremendous amount of guilt. They say anger, is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. Your best resolve is to be compassionate with yourself and others. This energy, again, it's abundant. So you have tons of it to give, and it becomes a disposition that you get to feel good about you in. When people cut me off, right? I'll be driving and someone will cut me off. And there was a time when I do some kind of getting upset, maybe some yelling, And along the way, kind of as I grew, especially as I grew in my practice of meditation, I really started to kind of take a breath between that reaction. And all of a sudden I started to see, first of all, they were just making a mistake. And I'm not going to respond to that error with a whole bunch of anger. And you can see it, because I've made that mistake before, right? Where you've cut someone off or made a mistake when you're driving, and and the other person's in the car and they're screaming. You can see them bugging. You can't hear a word that they're saying, but they're bugging out. And I realized at that point, I don't want to be that person. People make mistakes. So when someone does that, instead of getting all upset and feeling that toxic energy, that blood, that all that upset moment of something about what could have happened, I just smile, and I'm immediately thankful that we actually didn't get into an accident. They actually didn't hit my car. We're okay. And so I have this disposition, and I've been doing it for so long. It's such a part of my practice that when it happens, I actually smile and I can feel good energy in a moment and I actually literally choose to feel the good energy rather than the fear and the frustration. And I'm not sure how they are. And I smile. Sometimes I'll wave if they've made the mistake, like no problem, peace sign type of thing. And I know this sounds a little crazy to some of you. You're like, I'd rather give the middle finger. But I just don't think it's not that you gave them the middle finger. It's that you gave the middle finger. And that's the problem. It's not the energy that went to them and the messaging for them. It's that you were that source. And now you have kind of changed your being in doing so. And remember when I said that, being angry is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. That disposition, it does damage to your being. I think that's important. This compassion is not necessarily for someone else. It's for you. I think that's really important. So, I think one of the things, and this is important, right? Self-compassion becomes a really a big deal. We'll talk about self-compassion, and then I also want to talk about compassion towards others. I'll give you another example of compassion towards others real quick. When one of the things that happens with difference, people become very fearful of difference. And so sometimes, with the isms, racism, sexism, whatever it is, with the isms, the people who kind of have this hate energy going on. I've learned in my process, in my journey, to not respond to their hate with hate. So, for example, when people say racist things, someone uses the N-word, for example, I kind of look at that as their pain. In that moment, my compassion, it demands that I kind of see them as a hurt person. And so rather than internalizing their pain, I feel compassion for it. And when I think about how I would alleviate their pain, it's not by returning more pain or trying to hurt them like that's not the answer, because that's what you immediately have to think. If you're being compassionate, you're not only recognizing their pain, but then that key component is you want to alleviate it. So this takes a moment to kind of be able to fully assess the situation, to be able to attribute their limitation, their actions to their limitation or their limited perspective, their ignorance maybe, their fear maybe. I'm going to go a little bit into race, just a second here. White people live in a world where, and there's been a history here, a lot of tension between whites and blacks in this country. A lot of tension. We know that, a history of it. And interpersonally, socially, in the system, black people, we haven't had a lot of power. We didn't have a lot of power financially, economically, politically, but interpersonally, boy, because of the tough kind of, and we're talking overall, not in all cases, but because of the tough environments that we come from, interpersonally, boy, we can still, have some power in those moments. We have a boldness, because of the toughness that we've been. So white folks they've been conditioned, not just through interpersonal interactions, but through society's messages. There's some fear there. There's some fear thinking that we're different. And we have fear as well. I'll say, when I say we are all connected, but what I mean is our group of folks of color, so-called black people. There's a lot of fear there. And wherever there's this notion, because this notion of fear comes from us being separate. We're not separate. And I just want to bring this point home, that when we start to see that there is no difference between us, it creates more room for compassion. When you recognize the humanity of your brother and sister, when you recognize the humanity of them, you feel connected to their limitation. And so when someone else has an ignorant moment, when they do a hateful thing, I've seen it before. I've seen it in parents of, the mother of, you see it in these interviews with these people who've really experienced these awful, been victimized by people, and you see them come with a certain level of compassion and grace, which are words that describe God's energy. It's an amazing thing. Those are the things I feel like that's when you're truly tested. It's one thing to have compassion, again, when it's easy. It's a whole different task to have compassion when it's hard. It demands more of your being. It's really a test of whether you're compassionate or not. This is a powerful concept. I think if we can have greater compassion, we'll have greater connection to the self and to others. When you have compassion, you want to heal parts of yourself and parts of the community. You want to heal the pain in others. And all of a sudden, just by asking that question, how can you be a more healing force? Your energy has to change. When you have struggles within yourself, one of the things that you have to do that will help compassion is take a larger perspective. That's what I was trying to, and I know I was a little convoluted with it, but that's what I was trying to break down here with the notion of race relations, for example, right? Even within yourself, take a bigger picture. A lot of the goals that we have are huge. And last week we talked a lot about kind of like motivation and driving towards the goals. A lot of the goals that we have are really big. We don't realize how big they are, but they're big. And when you're in it, they don't feel big. They're just the business of your life. They're what you aspire for, but they're still big. So failing a couple of times, a lot of times along the way, that's a part of it. But oftentimes we don't have compassion for our failures. Instead, we feel an intense amount of shame. And I don't think that that's healthy. I think that we need to understand that the failures happen along the way. You've got to come to expect it. And in a part of traversing your struggle is being able to be kind to yourself when you fall. To smile and say, yeah, falling's a part of it. I think sometimes compassion and self-compassion, people talk about self-love, self-compassion. I think compassion is being able to also recognize when you're exhausted. There does become a point sometimes, like when you're pushing past your limitation. This is just a part of the grind for most. And sometimes we push past that point of exhaustion, that point of fatigue, and we say we're going to do it anyway. And a part of my own journey, when I feel myself becoming more irritable, I feel myself becoming more patient, that's one of the questions that I have. Am I tired? It's a real thing. Sometimes you can find yourself overwhelmed and tired and by a lot less compassionate. The reality is, we're facing awesome odds to be successful. A lot of times we don't really, in my response to you last week, or my talk last week, a lot of it, I talked about personal responsibility. And I do still believe in that. I believe we are responsible and we have to keep our minds on what we control, but we are also traversing tremendous odds. For many of us, we're have-nots. And to become haves in this country, in this world, is a very difficult thing. So, I talk about in order to be successful, you need patience and consistent effort. This is the formula for success, right? To maintain your path. This patience is born out of a certain bit of compassion for the self. Being able to understand that you're trying to do going against the current. It's not an easy space to be successful. There's a lot of things that are against you. And for some of us, there are more things, depending on where you sit on this system of oppression and marginalization. You may be more outside of the power structure. You may know less people and have maybe less paths inward. And so it's very difficult. I think because if you're not compassionate, there's two things that can happen. You can become depressed, angry, but you can also become hopeless and nihilistic, believing that there is no point to this thing. There's no point to this journey. So that compassion helps kind of keep you with a certain disposition and a certain energy to just keep pushing along the path. I think it's important. I think one of the things to remember that will help with your self-compassion, and I think it's a real thing, is to look at some of the parts of your limitations as just your humanity. Now, again, the eyes that you use for yourself, they're the eyes that you use for others. This is really important concept. If you can be patient with other people, you'll be more patient with yourself. If you can be more compassionate to yourself, that compassion, you'll be able to put that as an energy outward. Most of the time, people who are really controlling, angry, critical, that's an energy that, it feels like that's an energy that they're putting purely out to you. But if you think about it, even the parts of yourself that may be critical, control, those are things that you turn inward on yourself and are in complete inner turmoil as a function of within. You're beating yourself up awfully. Most people don't get that. People who beat up others, they beat up themselves. They beat up themselves probably even worse. So you think about it in your relationships with your partner or your children, your friends. Sometimes you'll find yourself really anxious and controlled, very demanding or very critical. It's never good enough. That's that lack of compassion. There's an inability in your fear that a person's going to fail, or your fear that they're going to go against you, or their fear that something's going to go back. This anxiety, it starts to depreciate. The fear starts to lessen the compassion. So as you increase your compassion, you'll also decrease your fear. You'll decrease your anxiety. They work like that. Think about it. You're one of the things you're so anxious about is the failure. When you think the things that can go wrong. But when you have compassion, you say, of course things go wrong. I don't want you to feel anxious. I don't want you to feel sad. Let me ease up and practice more kindness, if that makes sense. We got a couple bubbles. I'm going to pop them. What's up, you guys? Good morning. Good to have you on. I hope this talk on compassion is giving you something. I hope some people are thinking about some things. I hope this is helpful in some ways. It's really important to meditate on it and ask yourself, how am I doing with compassion? Am I able to see other people suffering? Am I actively trying to help others through their pain? How am I doing with compassion?
Good morning, or Grand Rising, Dr. Pete. I think it's a good topic, practicing compassion. At times when I have failed to exhibit compassion, I have had to pay dearly for the consequences. But I'm learning. I have to learn how to exercise it correctly. I have to learn how to be empathetic to what other people are going through. And I have to get better at it because it's not easy. And sometimes when you lose sight of being compassionate, you can put yourself in a compromising position, so where you could risk freedom, jail time, stuff like that, because you just get so upset at somebody's ignorance, or you get impatient with them, and then next thing you know, it's blown up into a full-blown physical confrontation, and you don't want that. So
yeah, absolutely. There's a big space of this is about accepting others, accepting them even as their limitation. And you might even say, It's unacceptable. You might even say that a lot. Yeah, I get it. Parts of yourself are unacceptable. Yeah, we do have to change those parts. But there demands a certain level of compassion to do it. Yeah. You have to forgive yourself in order to have greater inner peace, because it's from that place of forgiveness, that fostering of inner peace, that you become more prolific, that you actually can do more, become more. You let go of what's not so good, or these kind of punitive voices, these critical voices that are within you, and you make more room for loving ones. You make more room for compassionate voices, and that's an energy then that goes outward as well. Yeah, I think you got to treat yourself every day with a little bit of kindness. Forgive yourself. That doesn't mean accept your limitations and just say, yeah, we're here to be, less than. No, you have to push. But I think being compassionate helps with the push. It's a source energy for sure. Yeah, I find it as one of the most, and I think one of the things as men, particularly a lot of times, we lack compassion towards ourselves and towards others sometimes. And I'm not trying to just pick on men, but I think that a lot of women have lost the path towards what I would describe as a more natural energy. The word in other languages has come from compassion. There's a synonymous word, I can't even pronounce it, but it's in line with the notion of the word in the Bible for womb in Hebrew. So this compassion is an energy that is thought to come from the bond between mother and child. In fact, Solomon, he tested these two mothers, and he says, well, they argued about whose baby it was, and one was, he says, they were both claiming I'm the mother, that's not the real mother. And so he tested, said, well, let's not cut the baby in half, and each of you can have part of the baby. And the compassionate mother, the mother came forward and she said, no, you can't do that. And he knew then that was the mother that loved the most, because she was willing to give up her child to make sure that the child was okay. Yeah, compassion is a concept that's been talked about and meditated on for a long time. So it's not nothing new. Yeah. But I think one of the things that happens when you recognize that there's no difference between you, less separateness between you and others, the more you can recognize the connection between you and others, especially those that seem very different from you, the more you can identify their suffering, the more connected you become. The more connected you are, the more compassionate you become. It's an easy formula. You say, there but by the grace of God go I. In everything that you see the part of you that exists in the things that you struggle with the most in others. When you see it in others, you see and you feel yourself struggling in it the most, recognize that's probably something that has to do with you. When you feel really critical, recognize that that's a projection, likely. So that in that very same moment, because you recognize that ugly part in them is something that you're struggling with or have struggled with or fear within yourself, you can now feel a sense of connectedness, and it gives space for greater compassion. We have some more bubbles. Hold on.
Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah. It's Uncle Mike. What's up, Uncle Mike? Good morning. We're talking about compassion. It's good to have you guys up and discussing early morning. I want to hear your opinions too. So we got some space. I've got some time here where I don't start. I go to the gym. I'm all set, already showered up, ready to go. No rush. I got to tell you this morning routine on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. I'm getting it down to a science. I'm glad you guys decided to come out and hang out. This has been a great talk so far. I want to hear your thoughts about what I'm saying. I want to hear your questions. I want to hear your struggles in the application of compassion within yourself. I want to hear the struggles of the application of compassion in connecting with others. Within yourself, the struggle, and I want to hear about what goes on for you when you try to have compassion for others. Let's talk about it. Let's ask Dr. P.
So my understanding is that compassion is actually a spectrum, and on the one end of the spectrum, I guess you could perhaps say the dark end, you start with pity, and then you have sympathy, and then you have empathy, and then compassion. And pity is I feel bad for you. Sympathy is I hear you and I feel you and I understand. Empathy is I'm with you. I feel with you. And then compassion is I move to action. So compassion, from my understanding, is actually an action, not just a feeling. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there are a lot of definitions, and people can, I think those what you've described were kind of gradients of compassion, but not quite the same. Maybe, different words, you talk about pity, and pity is kind of like a function of sympathy, maybe like a sadness for them. You feel like they're lesser, but, I get it. I mean, empathy is really just a deep understanding from kind of an emotional perspective of what a person's going on, ability to empathize. And yeah, I agree with what you said also, that compassion is an action. I think that's the difference between empathy and compassion. So I would say that empathy is a component of compassion, but not compassion entirely. The wish to alleviate one's suffering is the key component to compassion, to alleviate the suffering. It's a desire. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily it has to be an action, but the feeling of a wish that it could change for a person. Typically, that feeling will lead to different actions. We've got another bubble.
Dr. P, great conversation. So, okay, here's the thing for me on compassion, because I'm usually a very compassionate person, but life has definitely ruffled me a little bit, where, that emotional control that you have, where if you can be around a nasty person and I still want them to win, but I'm not one who's going to go above and beyond to be super nice to that person. That's definitely something that I need to work on. But what I've noticed is compassion sometimes just make me be too much compassion, puts me too far into other people's problems, I think. And I think what I need to work on here is being compassionate, but not automatically jumping to aid everybody, because everybody didn't ask for my help. So, I guess that's something that I'm struggling with a little bit.
Yeah. And I think especially if you're taking on someone's problems, that's way too much, right? You only have so much capacity. But I do think you'll know what to do best. And maybe it's not just an action of you doing something differently for them, like we were just saying. Maybe it's also just a matter of saying a kind word, or sending good energy, or maybe even praying for them, right? You don't have to feel responsible for their struggle, but just have a deeper understanding and a wish that they didn't struggle. I think the first thing that it would demand in this compassion kind of process is just take pause, recognize, take an assessment of the situation, what's going on, and you don't have to control that you don't have to move. You don't have to quite do anything. Just recognize the experience and process it. Allow it to be there just as it is. As you I think there's a demand, to be a little bit curious. And again, we're not just talking about what goes on for other people, but for yourself. A little curious, investigate and be open to seeing the fuller picture of what's going on, rather than just kind of saying, I'm no good, or coming to a quick conclusion, they're a bad person. Be kind of curious, like maybe there's something. Give yourself and others the benefit of the doubt. Maybe there's something else going on. I want to kind of I bet you they're showing up angry. I'm showing up frustrated, but there's probably something a little bit deeper going on. Let me just kind of be patient, try to be understanding, and we'll see what to do very next. Yeah. I think I wish to cure the world of mental illness. I wish there was a way that there was no depression in the world, but that, I can wish wish the world were free of suffering. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to be responsible for changing everyone's suffering. I do what I can. And you have that between you and you. You know what your effort to be a kind person is. I'll tell you this, and this is one of the things that will help you. If you can just remember that when you are kind and you don't feel like it, especially when you're kind and you don't feel like it, you will walk away feeling better about you. Conversely, when you give in to the negative energy, you walk away feeling drained. You walk away feeling sad and ultimately shamed by giving into this negative energy. It expands. So you being compassionate, you being forgiving, you having a kind energy, these virtues, they're actually for you. That's a really hard thing, but we're all basically selfish in some ways. So the trick, and this is like the mind hack, if you will, the trick is to become selfish in a way that contributes to the greater good. So be selfish in a way that caring for yourself is being compassionate. Compassion to yourself and others. If you can be more compassionate to others, you'll be more compassionate to yourself. It'll just happen naturally. So these are things that you're doing. It's a state that you're maintaining for you. You're reducing your stress. Remember that. We talked about that at the beginning of the talk. This is all for you. And sometimes it doesn't feel that way. Sometimes it feels like you're being used up. And that's the fear stuff kind of coming in. Compassion is free. It's an abundant energy within you that heals you and others. So you don't have to worry about giving it up. It's different than, it's a little bit different than even love, even though I do feel like it's very much connected. You're not as vulnerable in this type of love. This is more of an agape experience, like a humanity kind of. It's something that you can just generally offer to anyone. And it really changes your nature. Let me tell you, when you find yourself being gentle with someone else's limitations, it feels really nice that you were a soothing energy. When they're beating themselves up and they're suffering through their own limitation, and you come to them with a kindness and a compassion, boy, is it a powerful feeling to you. I'm telling you, it's for your own benefit. Alexa, stop. We're coming close to our time. I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me, talking in this morning's talk. We've been talking about compassion. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Leave me some bubbles. I'll tell you, this has been a good talk. I'll tell you, you can look and do a little bit of an inventory within yourself. And ask yourself, like, how are you doing with your own compassion? How are you doing with your own self-care? Are you being kind to you? Are you beating yourself up? Are you criticizing every bit of your journey? Are you not taking the bigger picture and recognizing, some of the things I even within myself, I have to remember this because, one of my goals, and I share it all the time, my weight loss journey, it's a tough path. It's not an easy thing to work on. And sometimes one of the things that I say to myself, one of the narratives within myself is I'll say, like, how can I know so many things about how to change, and how can I be disciplined in so many areas, but still struggle in this thing? And some of it, it goes back to my family of origin stuff, messages around food, and even just early, trauma, just different things that I've been through. And when I kind of take a look at my life, and I look at where it's been and what it meant to be poor and grow up that way, and, what it meant to have different struggles in my life as a kid, those things impacted me. It built this bond with food as a healing energy. There was a time, this is the first time, this generation that we're dealing with is like no other time before. We're dealing in a time now where we have a surplus of food, for example. And every other generation before this, it was like, you better eat every bit of that food, because we don't know when we're going to get more food. And it was like a deep sense of survival to eat everything on your plate, to make sure you save the leftovers. This stuff is a part of my socialization, my upbringing. And now I have plenty. And I'm fighting and making sure that I'm not eating too much. This is a different time in all the history of man. We all have a genetic wiring to consume as much as we can. It's literally there. And so we have to fight this now. There was never a time when we weren't fat before people were starving. Right? We're in a different time now. So I want to be compassionate with myself in this process of changing deep intrapsychic fixtures, things that are fixed within me, that I'm in injuries and training that I'm trying to work through. I need to have compassion in that. What I mean by that is being able to see the bigger picture of my struggle, and thereby being patient with it, wanting to alleviate that suffering that I have. And the way to do that is by keeping my eyes on the bigger prize, or the deeper underlying struggles. Hold on for just 1 second. Thank you for leaving some bubbles and thinking with me on this topic and talking with me on this topic. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you. What's up, Stereo? I'm Dr. Pete. If you appreciate the content that we're having today in the conversation, I just ask that you click on that little link on top and subscribe to my page. Most of you are probably already subscribed because I consider you friends. Thanks so much for subscribing. But if you haven't subscribed yet to the page, that would be my YouTube page is kind of an important thing. I'm trying to build this platform so I can at least pay the people who are doing all this work for me, and not be out of the pocket. Your old boy, Dr. Pete's going broke here trying to launch this thing. So work with me here and subscribe if you can.
I'm just sitting here listening, kind of struggling not to be annoyed by it, for real. It's not because you're saying anything wrong. I think that you're saying sensible things, and I do agree with you because it's the right thing to do. But I'm struggling with interactions with adults right now because I don't believe that I'm being treated the way that I treat people. I don't believe that people are holding the same respects for me as I'm holding for them. So I'm just like sitting here struggling to listen to actually absorb it. Like, why should I even?
Yeah.
Why should I muster up any compassion for these people who don't have any compassion or sympathy for me or consideration? Yeah. So yeah, but I'm just listening. But like I said, at the end of the day, you are right, because it is the right thing to do, is to be more compassionate.
Yeah, no, and I think not only do I hear you, but I agree that it is hard to do, and some people make it really hard to do, and it doesn't feel like it's fair. what I'm asking you to do is to say, hey, being compassionate in the face, and especially in the face of what we'll call like a person who's not being kind or not being right. That moment of having compassion is the hardest moment. That's truly when the virtue will be tested. You're not gonna have your virtue tested under when it's easy. That's not really a test of compassion. The truest compassion is when it's difficult to have. Can you have it still? That's to know if you really possess the virtue, and that's whatever virtue you want to look at. It's under the heat in the storm. Do you really know if you got a good umbrella or not? Right? You don't know. I remember buying this fancy umbrella from the store. I mean, super fancy. I think it opened like backwards or something. Like it was like fancy, right? I was like so proud and excited about this umbrella. And man, you already know when I got it into the storm, boy, that joker just flipped up. I was like, oh shit. So you really don't know what you got until you go through a storm. You don't really have a test of compassion until you have somebody who's really suffering over there. And when I say really suffering, they may be manifesting that suffering through anger. But the thing that you have to remember, and this is what I want to put it back to, because I think that was a great point, a great comment that I think a lot of us struggle with. I think the point is to remember that your soul will be lighter as a function of it. We think we're protecting ourselves by being angry. We're actually corrupting our souls with it. We're diminishing ourselves. So other people's energy, we're allowing it to dictate and become a barometer of our energy. We're allowing it to set the tone of our being. And that I think that gives them too much power. Remember all the positives, and you recognize, all the positive outcomes. Even the research has shown, reduction of stress, reduction of anxiety, right? Reduction of increase of overall well-being, right? So all the studies are showing this compassion thing is effective. And then we know that the more you can have it for other people, the more you can have it for yourself. So the easier you'll be on yourself. It becomes almost a general disposition. So there's all these pluses to it. But there's still this fear of vulnerability that we're being taken advantage of. See, here's the thing, and this is what why I say this all the time. Love, compassion, there's no limit on what you can put out. The problem becomes in our life what we talk about, what we expect back from other people. Relationships have conditions, have terms, where love is unconditional, right? I can have as much love, I can give as much love, because that just becomes my own personal setting. I got this poem. Now this poem, Mother Teresa had it on her wall. It's actually, there's another author who wrote it. I keep forgetting his name, so I'm gonna look it up for you in a second. So the poem, it says, people are often unreasonable, irrational, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you're kind, people may accuse you of being selfish and having ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you're successful, you'll win some unfaithful friends and some genuine enemies. Succeed anyway. If you're honest and sincere, people may deceive you. Be honest anyway. Be sincere anyway. What you spend years creating, others could destroy overnight. Create anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, some may be jealous, but be happy anyway. The good you do today will often be forgotten. Do good anyway. Give the best you have, and it will probably never be enough. But give your best anyway. Because in the final analysis, it's between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. I think that's the best answer that I can give. I think that poem really sums it up. This is about you and your journey. This is about you and the being that you're choosing to be. And other people and their limitations, the way that they're going to see you, their energy, their irrational beings, their desire to destroy what you create, their jealousy, their limited memory of all your good things, that should not determine who you're going to be in this life. This is a part of life. Accepting that that's the limited nature of others, that's a really important part. So what you expect back from others, you might as well go ahead and set your expectation pretty low, because most people will meet you right there. However, your expectations of yourself can't parallel that low setting. You've got to, in some ways, hold yourself to a higher expectation, a higher standard. Because in the end, it's between you and you. Yeah, I want to thank you guys for listening this morning so much. I'll be back here tomorrow morning. This has been a great talk. I appreciate you hanging out with me. I see a couple of my friends down there. It's good to see you guys. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for all your comments and your feedback this morning. We talked a little bit about compassion. If you missed any part of this talk, please go back and listen to it. We'll be back on here. I think compassion is important. I'm working on it. And it's a practice, folks. It's not an endpoint. Be patient with your practice. Be compassionate with your practice of compassion, right? Be patient and just wish to be better. I know I do. I'll talk with you guys. I'll be here tomorrow morning. We'll check in for a bit before I get to the gym. I'm headed off to the gym. Hey, Matt, I see you out there. Uncle Mike, you'd be proud of me. I'm on my way to the gym, about to get it in. Ladies, gentlemen, everyone, I'll see you tomorrow. Until then, peace. Wait, here's thunder. Hold on. I'm sorry. One more bubble.
So me expecting for people not to be shit or coherent very much or very intelligent is correct then, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a low expectation.
Yeah, I think I don't think everyone you meet is going to be that way. And I think you know enough now. You've traveled your road long enough to know the nature of people. Not a lot of people. Here's the thing that will heal some of you, though, because I hear the frustration. You're harboring and internalizing their negative energy. And that's the thing to be worried about. See, forgive them. What I'm asking you with compassion is to see those limitations of theirs as struggles of theirs. And it will ease up on your frustration of them. And it will stop. It stops you from personalizing it. When you hear their limitations like that and you see them like that, you become frustrated and you become tense. And that's your energy that turns up. That's not good for you. A part of why I wanted to do this talk is because it happens for me too. Sometimes you get lost in a space where your compassion gets a little bit low. Your patience become a little bit low. Your frustration becomes a little bit high. And it's unhealthy. And it perpetuates just a sadness. Many of us, I think at the base of our depression is a lack of compassion, is the frustration and energy outward that we think is protective, but is actually a negative energy for our being. It's no asset, but a detriment to our being. Yeah. I wish you well in your journey here and in your path towards your best self. This is Dr. Pete, and you've been tripping with Dr. Pete. For the full show, please listen to us live on stereo, or you can listen to playbacks on YouTube, Anchor, and Spotify. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, Peace.